I need to tell you something before I start. What you're about to hear isn't a story about family drama. It's not about hurt feelings at a holiday dinner or passive-aggressive texts that went too far. This is a story about cold water filling my lungs while the people who were supposed to love me stood on a wooden dock, arms crossed, watching me fight for my life. And this is the story of what I did about it. My name is Nadia Caldwell. I'm 32 years old. I run a marketing firm I built from nothing, from cold calls made in a studio apartment, from dishes washed with hands so cracked they bled, from late nights studying when everyone else in my family was out spending money they didn't have. I built something real, something lasting, something I'm proud of. And 3 months ago, my family tried to make sure I'd never see what it would become. It didn't happen with a weapon they had to plan. It happened with a dock, a lake, and 20 feet of black water they knew I couldn't survive. 8 minutes underwater. Heart stopped twice in the ambulance. 2 weeks in intensive care with a machine breathing for me. A nurse named Catherine pulled me back from wherever I was headed and told me I was a miracle she'd never be able to explain. She was right about the miracle. She had no idea what I was going to do with it. You don't wake up one day and decide your family sees you as prey. That understanding arrives slowly, over years, disguised as love and need and obligation, until one day you're underwater and finally, brutally clear about what you actually were to them. Let me show you how it started. My father, Reginald Caldwell, was a man of quiet dignity. He worked 3 jobs nights at a printing plant, weekends at a hardware store, early mornings delivering papers before any of us were awake. He died in a car accident when I was 8 years old, driving home from a double shift in the rain. He left behind my mother Diane, my older brother Jerome, my sister Tamara, and a mountain of debt that felt like it had its own gravity. Jerome was 17 when Daddy died, old enough to step up. He didn't. He chose convenience instead, whatever was easiest, whatever was closest, whatever numbed the grief without requiring effort. By the time he was 20, he had a habit and a talent for making every bad decision feel like someone else's fault. Tamara was 15. She found her escape in relationships, a series of men who came and went, each one leaving her a little more convinced that she deserved better than she was willing to work for. And I was 8. So I watched and I learned, and I decided with the particular stubbornness of a child who's lost the one person who made sense, that I was going to be different. By 16, I was working 2 jobs. A bakery before school started, a supermarket after it ended. I handed most of my paychecks to my mother because the alternative was an eviction notice, and I'd watched enough families lose their apartments to understand what that spiral looked like once it started. Jerome didn't contribute. Jerome was going through things. Tamara didn't contribute. Tamara had her own problems. And my mother, God love her, accepted both explanations without question while quietly, almost imperceptibly, counting on me to fill every gap they left behind. I put myself through community college working nights at a diner. My hands cracked from hot water and industrial soap. I smelled like grease for 4 years. I studied in the break room between shifts, fell asleep over textbooks at 2 a.m., and graduated with honors because I was not going to let that floor be my ceiling. Then came State University. Then a degree in marketing. Then an apartment so small I had to fold the couch into the wall to open the bathroom door, and in that apartment, in the margins of whatever space I could clear, I started my business. Year 1, $8,000 in revenue. Year 2, $43,000. Year 5, $200,000 annually. And that's when my family remembered I existed. Jerome appeared first. He materialized on my doorstep on a Thursday evening with red eyes and a story about foreclosure. We're blood, Nadia. You know I'd do the same for you. I gave him $15,000, not because I believed the second sentence, because of the first one. 2 months later, he needed $10,000 more. His wife Stacy's medical bills, he said. I believed that one too, mostly because I needed to. Then Tamara came with her hand out. Private school tuition for her son Darius. $12,000 to get him through the year. My mother needed a reliable car because the old one was embarrassing her at church. My cousin Raymond needed startup capital for a business that never quite materialized. Aunt Lorraine had a tax situation. Uncle Bobby had a situation of a different kind. Over 8 years, I gave this family more than $400,000. Not loans, I want to be precise about that. I called them loans. I thought of them as loans. They understood them as gifts and acted accordingly, never a repayment, never a plan, never even the pretense of one. When I brought up repayment, conversations somehow circled back to everything the family had sacrificed for me, as though my father's death had been a service they'd performed, and the debt was mine to carry forever. The moment I stopped, the moment I stood in my kitchen one Tuesday morning and said, out loud to no one, I am done, that's when everything that came after became inevitable. The final breaking point wasn't dramatic. It rarely is. Jerome's wife Stacy called me at 2 a.m. 6 months before the lake. Drunk, desperate, final notice from the bank, she said, Jerome needs you, the kids need you. What kind of person lets their own blood end up on the street? I had been awake for 19 hours. I was 2 weeks away from signing a contract with a regional healthcare network that would have tripled my business. Every decision I made in those weeks existed on a tightrope, client calls scripted and rehearsed, proposals revised at midnight, numbers stress-tested until I could recite them in my sleep. I had nothing left for this. Not anymore. Not this particular conversation that I'd had in one form or another 43 times in 8 years. Stacy, I said, I've given Jerome more than $60,000 in 3 years. He needs a job, not another check. The silence lasted long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then she started screaming. You know what she called me? Heartless, uppity, a traitor to my own family. A woman who'd gotten too comfortable with her fancy apartment and her college degree to remember where she came from. She said I thought I was better than everyone. She said I'd forgotten who was there for me when I had nothing. She said my father would be ashamed of the person I'd become. I want to pause on that last one, because she chose that particular sentence knowing exactly what it would do. My father's name in that context, weaponized. The same man who worked himself to death at 3 jobs, who taught me by example that dignity was something you built one honest hour at a time, was now being invoked to argue that I should write another check to the son who hadn't held a legitimate job in a decade. I remember thinking, with a strange clarity that surprised me even then, she's right that I've changed. She's just catastrophically wrong about what changed. I didn't yell back. I didn't argue. I said very quietly that I was sorry things were hard and that I hoped Jerome would figure out a path forward. Then I hung up, put my phone face down on the counter, and stood in my kitchen for a long time in the dark. That was the night I understood it was over. Not the relationship that had been dying for years. The agreement. The unspoken contract where I played the role of family bank and they played the role of family in return. That exchange was finished, and nothing I said or gave would ever repair it, because I had never been the problem. I had been the solution they were addicted to, and solutions that stop working get discarded. At the next family barbecue, 3 weeks before the lake, my mother pulled me aside near the rose bushes she'd kept since I was a girl. She used the voice she reserved for requests. Soft, almost sweet, practiced into a kind of art. Baby, your brother is really struggling. Maybe just one more time. No, Mama. Her face transformed so quickly it was almost impressive. The softness evaporated, and underneath it was something I'd never seen directed at me before. A cold, evaluating contempt, the look of someone who has decided that an asset has failed and is now reclassifying it. After everything this family did for you, she said, leaning into each word, we clothed you, we fed you, we kept a roof over your head. I wanted to say, I was 16 when I started covering part of this household's expenses. I wanted to say, you are describing the baseline of parenting and presenting it as a debt I owe you for life. I wanted to say, I am the only reason this family has had a roof for the past 8 years, and you know it. I said none of it, because I understood that the conversation we were having had never been about facts. It had always been about loyalty, and their definition of loyalty was unconditional financial surrender with a grateful smile. I went home that night and made a decision I should have made years earlier. I set a boundary. I was done funding lifestyles. I was done being the safety net that everyone fell into and no one helped mend. I was done translating my love into cash deposits that disappeared into habits and excuses and schemes that never quite materialized. They heard that decision as a declaration of war. What I didn't know was that their response to declarations of war was considerably more extreme than I had anticipated. The Williams family reunion at Whispering Lake Ha. D been a fixture for 15 years. The same rental house. The same private dock stretching 20 feet into the water. The same rotating cast of grievances dressed up as celebration. This year, I felt the shift the moment I arrived. Conversations stopped when I walked into rooms. Cousins who used to hug me tight now offered two-fingered waves. My mother introduced me to her church friends as my daughter who believes money matters more than family, which was the kind of sentence that sounds like a joke until you realize she meant every word of it. I heard you're letting your brother lose his house, Aunt Lorraine said across the porch, loud enough to be heard by the 12 people sitting near her. I heard you've been running an unlicensed loan operation out of your living room, I almost said. I didn't. Raymond, my cousin, the instigator, the one who'd always found his power in making other people feel small, started working the room after dinner. I watched him move from cluster to cluster, bending heads, murmuring things that made people cut their eyes toward me. I knew what he was doing. I'd watched him do it at every reunion for 20 years. He was building a consensus. What I didn't understand, not yet, was what that consensus was for. Tamara stood up near the fire pit with that particular smile she'd been perfecting since high school, the one that was warm enough to seem friendly and sharp enough to cut. "Come on," she said, looking at me. "Let's go down to the dock. Get some air, clear the tension." And here's the thing about family. Even when you know something is wrong, even when the back of your neck is prickling, and your body is sending signals your brain keeps overriding, you go. Because family is supposed to be safe. Because you've been telling yourself that story your entire life, and you're not ready to stop believing it. I went. The dock creaked under our feet in the darkness. The lake was black and still. Raymond positioned himself behind me so casually, so naturally, that I didn't register it as positioning until it was too late. "You know what your problem is, Nadia," he said, and his voice had changed, the performance had dropped out of it entirely. "You forgot that family means something." "Family means something to me," I said. "That's why I've spent 8 years." I didn't finish the sentence. Raymond's arms came around mine from behind, pinning them. Jerome stepped into me from the front. It happened in seconds, the kind of seconds that seem to stretch sideways when your brain understands that it is in genuine danger. I fought. I twisted. I screamed. My feet found the wet edge of the dock, and then found nothing. The impact with the water knocked every atom of air out of my body. The lake closed over me instantly, and it was cold, not uncomfortable cold, survival cold, the kind that tells your muscles to stop before your mind is ready to accept that message. I went down fast. I found the surface once, broke it, screamed one word, help, and looked at the dock. They were all standing there. Tamara had her phone raised, recording. Jerome had his arms crossed. Raymond was smiling. My mother was nowhere near the water. She had stayed at the house. I went under again, and this time the surface seemed much farther away. The next coherent memory I have is a beeping sound, and a brightness that made me want to go back to wherever I'd been. A nurse named Catherine told me a jogger had found me on the shore 2 miles downstream. Unconscious. Blue, not breathing. My heart had stopped twice in the ambulance. The doctors said I had been underwater for approximately 8 minutes based on my core temperature and the brain swelling they found on my scans. 8 minutes. The threshold for permanent brain damage is 4. I was not supposed to come back intact. But I did, and I was immediately, with perfect clarity, very angry. The social worker came on day 3 to ask about my emergency contacts. She mentioned that my phone had logged dozens of missed calls from numbers sharing my last name. Should I reach out to them? Block every number on that list, I told her. And if anyone calls the hospital asking about my condition, tell them I didn't make it. She looked at me for a long moment, then she nodded. Those 2 weeks in intensive care were the most productive of my life. I want you to understand what recovery from near drowning actually looks like, because it isn't peaceful. There's the brain swelling, which they monitored with scans every 48 hours, and which caused headaches so severe I couldn't tolerate light for the first 4 days. There's the lung damage from water aspiration, which meant that breathing felt like pulling air through wet cloth. There's the hypothermia aftermath, which left me with a bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of sleep seemed to touch. And there's the psychological dimension, the kind of trauma that wakes you up at 3 a.m. with the absolute physical certainty that you are underwater, that the ceiling is a lake's surface, that you cannot get to it in time. I had all of that. I processed it the way I've processed every hard thing in my life, by working. I requested a notepad on day 4 and I began writing. Not a journal, not letters I'd never send. A file. Every piece of financial information I'd gathered over 8 years of being the family's accountant, banker, and emergency fund. Jerome's income sources, Raymond's business structure and client list, Tamara's tax situation, my mother's reverse mortgage application, and the conversations I'd overheard during her application process that hadn't quite added up. The gaps and inconsistencies I'd noted over the years and filed away without examining too closely, because examining them would have required me to see my family clearly, and I hadn't been ready for that. I was ready now. The thing about being the family member who handles money is that you accumulate information. You see pay stubs and bank statements and loan documents. You hear conversations that were meant for other ears. You notice when the numbers someone tells you don't match the life they're living. I had been gathering data on my family for 8 years without knowing that's what I was doing. And now, lying in a hospital bed with a machine helping me breathe properly, I organized it all into something usable. Nurse Catherine found me writing at 2 in the morning on day 6 and told me I needed to rest. "I'll rest when I'm finished," I told her. She looked at my notepad. "What are you working on?" "Consequences," I said. She nodded slowly, the way nurses do when they've seen enough of the world to understand that certain kinds of healing happen in forms that don't look like rest. She dimmed the room lights and left me alone. By the time I was discharged, pale, 10 pounds lighter, with a follow-up care plan and a prescription I filled once and never needed again, I had a comprehensive document covering every member of my family who had stood on that dock. Their financial structures, their legal vulnerabilities, their known associates, their public records. I went directly from the hospital discharge desk to the office of a private investigator named Daniel Cho, a former federal agent who specialized in financial crimes, recommended by my business attorney, a man who had spent 20 years watching people try to hide what they'd done and learning every place they thought to look. I laid my notepad on his desk. I told him what had happened at the lake in 12 sentences, without editorializing. Then I told him what I needed. Complete profiles on 7 people. Assets, liabilities, business relationships, legal exposure, known associates, anything that touches a court record or a federal filing. Everything that exists. He reviewed the list carefully. "This is comprehensive preliminary work. Can I ask what you intend to do with what I find?" "They tried to kill me," I said. "Now I intend to make sure they face what they actually did, legally, fully documented, and without any of them being able to claim they didn't understand the seriousness of it." He didn't blink. "How thorough do you want me to be?" "I want them to lose everything they have, one piece at a time, in the order that hurts most, until they understand what it feels like to be desperate and alone and underwater with no one willing to move." Daniel's research took 6 weeks. What he uncovered was beyond anything I had expected, and I had expected considerable darkness. Jerome had not merely been struggling financially. He had been running an identity theft scheme, using stolen social security numbers to open credit accounts, rack up balances, and walk away. He'd been doing it for 3 years. He was also collecting federal disability payments while working full-time at an auto repair shop, which is a federal crime with a minimum 5-year sentence. Raymond's landscaping business was a cash-handling front for a local drug distribution network. He had been moving money through the business for 2 years. The IRS had been building a case and needed someone to complete the picture. Tamara had been concealing income on her federal tax returns. Specifically, the money I'd been sending her for Darius's private school tuition, which she'd been pocketing after pulling him from the school and enrolling him in public school without telling anyone. And my mother had committed mortgage fraud, hiding significant assets during a legal proceeding, and had filed a false police report about my incident at the lake, telling investigators I was an experienced swimmer who'd likely had an accident. They were all criminals, which meant what I was about to do wasn't just revenge. It was a civic duty. I want to be precise about the order of operations, because order mattered. First came the anonymous tips, a detailed letter to the IRS about Jerome's unreported disability fraud and his identity theft operation, a call to the Untie DA's Financial Crimes Division about Raymond's cash transactions, a certified letter to the family court overseeing my mother's previous divorce proceedings, alerting them to assets she had concealed. I sent all three on the same day, from 3 different post offices, wearing sunglasses. Then I waited 3 weeks while their world started cracking beneath the surface in ways they couldn't yet identify. Let them feel the ground shifting without knowing why. Let them get anxious. Let them call each other. Let them wonder. Then I made my first appearance. I drove to the auto shop where Jerome had been working full-time while collecting federal disability checks. I wore a charcoal blazer. I walked in like I owned the floor. The wrench hit the concrete before he finished turning around. Nadia, his voice was barely air. I thought. I know what you thought, I said. I'm not here to discuss what you thought. The shop had gone quiet. 6 mechanics, a service manager, and a customer waiting for an oil change were all watching. About what happened at the lake, he started. You mean when you and Raymond held my arms while I was pushed into water you knew I couldn't swim in? When you stood on the dock watching me beg for help and didn't move? That lake. His boss, Mr. Rodriguez, had materialized behind him with the particular posture of a man who is about to have a very bad afternoon. I turned to him with my most professional expression. I apologize for the interruption. I just need to let you know that the insurance fraud investigators will be arriving within the hour. Your employee has been collecting federal disability benefits while working full-time here for the past 3 years. I'd recommend having your records available. I left before Jerome found his voice. I sat in my car across the street and watched the federal agents arrive 47 minutes later. I watched Jerome come out of the building with his hands behind his back. I watched his coworkers stand in the parking lot not knowing where to look. I drove away. Stacy called that evening, hysterical and reaching. Nadia, please, he has kids. Please, you don't understand what. Stacy, he has a federal case. He has children because I paid for their school supplies and their birthday parties and their Christmas presents for 6 years. And he has a criminal record because he made criminal choices. But the bail, they're saying 20,000. I won't give you 20 cents. You can't just. I can, I did, good night. Tamara was harder to reach. After Jerome's arrest made the local news, she went quiet, new number, different routes, the particular evasiveness of someone who knows the walls are moving. But I knew her pressure point, Darius. I had already, weeks earlier, established a legitimate scholarship fund through my business specifically for him. He would stay in his school regardless of what happened to his mother. I wasn't interested in punishing a child for the sins of the adults around him. But Tamara didn't know that yet. I requested a meeting with Dr. Evelyn Moore, the founder and head mistress of Darius's academy, a distinguished woman who had built the school over 30 years from nothing but conviction and discipline. Her story and mine had more in common than she knew. I laid everything on her desk. Tamara's tax filings, the discrepancy between what she'd received from me and what she'd reported, her connection to Raymond's business, which was now under active federal investigation. I want to give you advance notice, I told Dr. Moore, because I suspect the IRS will be freezing her assets before the end of the month. I didn't want Darius's enrollment to be interrupted without warning. What I didn't mention was the scholarship fund already in place. I wanted Dr. Moore to have the facts. I wanted Tamara to have the consequences. And I wanted Darius protected, quietly, without fanfare, the way someone who actually cares about a child's future would do it. Tamara's call came at 6 a.m. How could you drag my son into this? Good morning, Tamara. My son Nadia, my child. Your son is fine. Your son will continue to be fine. You should be asking how you dragged yourself into this. She was crying, which might have meant something on a different morning. You always had to be better than us, she said, and I recognized the sentence because I'd heard it in different configurations for 20 years. You always had to prove. Goodbye, Tamara. My mother called next, not to apologize, to accuse. You're tearing this family apart. I'm tearing it apart. There was a pause, you know what I mean. I know exactly what you mean, Mama. You mean that I'm the problem. Same as always. The one who has too much, gives too little, remembers too well. The one who doesn't understand that family means bleeding yourself dry for people who won't even jump in the water when you're drowning. That was an accident. You filed a police report, saying I was a strong swimmer who must have had some kind of episode. You told investigators there was nothing unusual about that night. That's not an accident, that's obstruction. Nadia. You're about to lose the house, Mama. The government takes assets connected to financial crimes. You should call a lawyer before the week is out. I should explain what I meant. Daniel's investigation had uncovered that my mother had been helping Raymond hide cash assets through her reverse mortgage application. Not innocently, not accidentally. She had signed documents she knew were false. She had participated in a cover-up of my near murder. The federal case building around Raymond had threads that ran directly through her front door. She didn't call a lawyer in time. Raymond lasted the longest, because Raymond was the most careful. He had the instincts of someone who'd spent years staying one step ahead of accountability, and when the DA raided his business and found $200,000 in cash concealed in equipment storage, his first move was to hire a lawyer and try to negotiate his way out. His attorney called me on a Tuesday. Ms. Caldwell, my client would like to explore options for resolving this matter in a way that works for everyone. Tell your client, I don't negotiate with people who tried to drown me. Ms. Caldwell, I think the characterization of that evening. Let me give you the characterization, counselor. Your client, along with two co-conspirators, lured me to an isolated location under false pretenses. He physically restrained me while others pushed me into a body of water he knew I couldn't navigate. When I surfaced and screamed for help, he stood on the dock laughing and refusing to render aid or allow anyone else to. I was underwater for 8 minutes. My heart stopped twice. That's not a family dispute. That's attempted murder. Charge 1. Silence. He is also the primary operator of a money laundering enterprise now under active federal investigation. His co-conspirators have already begun providing testimony. He is looking at RICO charges, financial crimes, and conspiracy to commit murder. That's charges 2, 3, and 4. Surely there's some way to. The time to negotiate was before he threw me in that lake. There's nothing to discuss. Raymond's attempt to cooperate with federal investigators came too late and offered too little. He had spent 2 years building a criminal operation that had touched too many people for any single testimony to unravel. The DA had what they needed without him. He went to trial anyway. I want to tell you about the courtroom. It was a Tuesday morning, gray light through tall windows, the particular hush of a room where something that cannot be undone is about to become official. I sat in the second row. I wore a simple black dress. I did not wear sunglasses because I wanted them to see my face clearly when it was over. Jerome pleaded guilty to disability fraud and conspiracy the week before. 5 years, federal prison. Restitution to the tune of 3 years of fraudulent payments plus interest and penalties. Tamara accepted a deal on the tax evasion charges, 2 years in minimum security, restitution, supervised release. Her son Darius was already settled into the scholarship program I'd established. He didn't know it came from me, and I preferred it that way. Raymond went to trial and lost. 8 years, money laundering, conspiracy, and 2 counts relating to the incident at the lake. His lawyer's closing argument was more emotional than factual, which told you everything about the strength of the evidence. My mother's trial was last. 3 charges: mortgage fraud, participation in a money laundering enterprise, and providing false information to federal investigators in connection with an attempted murder case. At 72 years old, the prosecution was not subtle about what a conviction would mean for the remainder of her life. The prosecutor, a methodical young woman named Sandra Pierce, addressed the jury in a quiet, even voice that somehow carried more weight than shouting would have. "This is not a story about a family that fell apart under financial pressure," she said. "This is a story about a family that built a criminal enterprise, benefited from it for years, and when the one member who refused to participate finally said no, attempted to silence her permanently. The defendant did not pull her daughter from the water. The defendant filed a false report to mislead the investigation. The defendant was not a passive bystander. She was a participant." The defense attorney argued family tragedy, grief, dysfunction, a misunderstanding that spiraled. He used the word accidental 11 times, I counted. The jury deliberated for 40 minutes. Guilty on all counts. When the judge asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement, I stood slowly. I felt the weight of every year between the first time I handed Jerome a check and this moment, the weight of the love I'd carried for people who had calculated its exact worth and found it insufficient. I looked at the bench, not at my family. "Your Honor, for 8 years, I funded the lives of people who treated my generosity as a debt I owed them for the crime of succeeding. I gave more than $400,000 to people who saw me not as family, but as infrastructure, as something to use until it failed, and then to remove." I paused. I looked at the family table. My mother was looking at her hands. When I finally stopped, they didn't disown me. They didn't cut me off. They made a decision that what I represented was more valuable eliminated than present. They chose a dock and a lake and a dark night in August. They succeeded in killing someone that night. The woman who believed blood meant safety, who thought love was something you could give your way into, she drowned. What came back from that water is someone who understands that family is a choice, and that they made theirs long before I made mine. The jury had already delivered its verdict, but I wanted the record to reflect exactly what had happened. I don't forgive them. I don't wish them harm beyond what the law has already determined. I simply refuse to carry them anymore. And I want the court to understand, the most dangerous thing that happened that August night wasn't what they did to me. It was that I survived it. I sat down. Today marks 1 year since the water closed over my head. I'm sitting in a corner office on the 14th floor of a building I chose because of the view, city in every direction, glass and light, and the particular beauty of a skyline that doesn't care about your last name or your family's opinion of your worth. I have 3 new contracts on my desk, representing the largest clients in my company's history. My business is worth more than I let myself imagine during those 18-hour days in my studio apartment. I think about those days sometimes. The cracked hands and the second-hand computer and the cold calls that went nowhere. I think about how much I gave away, not just the money, but the emotional reserves, the years of quiet grief at what my family was and wasn't, the exhausting work of loving people who didn't love you back proportionally. I don't think about it with bitterness anymore. I think about it the way you think about a hard winter, grateful for what it proved about your capacity to survive. My assistant buzzed the intercom 3 weeks ago. "Ms. Caldwell, there's someone in the lobby asking for you. Says she's your sister." Tamara had been released early, good behavior, minimum security, the particular mercy the system extends to people who didn't get the longest sentence. She was standing in my lobby with a small rolling suitcase and the look of someone who had been somewhere difficult and come back changed. The arrogance I'd known my entire life was gone. In its place was something hollower and more genuine. "Hello, Nadia." "It's Ms. Caldwell in a professional context. What do you need?" She flinched. I wanted to apologize for the lake, for the years before it, for standing there with my phone. Her voice broke, for doing nothing. I studied her face for a long time. I've gotten good at reading people since that night. When you've been fooled badly enough by the people you trusted most, You develop new instruments. What I saw was real. Exhausted, diminished, real. Are you apologizing because you're sorry, or because you need something? Both, she said. I'm not going to lie to you, both. I respected the honesty enough to let her finish. Darius is doing well. He told me there's a scholarship, he doesn't know where it's from, but she stopped. Was that you? I didn't answer. I thought it was you. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. My probation ends next month and I have nowhere to go. I was hoping. No. Nadia. Ms. Caldwell, and no, I'm not going to fund your fresh start. I'm not going to provide housing or employment or grocery money or any other form of support. Not because I want you to suffer. Because you are an adult who has now, finally, been held accountable for adult choices, and what happens next has to come from you. She nodded. The tears were quiet, not performed. I understand, she said. I'm not sure you do yet, but you might eventually. She left without asking again. I went back to my desk. My phone showed 19 missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Jerome calling from inside. Raymond's lawyer trying one more angle, probably. My mother's church friends who'd appointed themselves mediators in a situation they fundamentally misunderstood. I cleared them all. Here is what I want you to understand, because this is the part that people get wrong. This story isn't about revenge. Revenge is what you do when you want the other person to suffer. What I did was witness. I documented what had happened. I made sure the people responsible faced what they had actually done. I protected a child who didn't deserve to pay foe. Arit and I got out. They didn't lose everything because I hated them. They lost everything because they had been building toward that outcome for years. The fraud, the deception, the criminal enterprises, the corruption of something that should have been ordinary family love, and all I did was make sure those consequences arrived on schedule. The woman who went into that water was someone who had spent 32 years trying to purchase belonging with money and effort, and the willingness to stay smaller than she was. She had let people rewrite her story, diminish her contribution, treat her success as something suspicious rather than admirable. The woman who came back out was done with all of that. I'm not bitter, I'm not broken. I am, for the first time in my adult life, completely and utterly free of the weight of people who were never going to acknowledge what I was worth. They tried to take everything. They gave me the only thing I actually needed: permission to stop. So tell me, was I wrong? Was there a line I crossed? Or does accountability look like cruelty to people who have never been held responsible for a single thing they've done? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every one. And if stories about people who finally put themselves first speak to something in you, if you've ever been the one holding everyone up while they let you sink, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Because there are more stories like this one, and every single one of them deserves to be heard.